Alrighty. And we are almost, I think we're live now. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for getting up today bright and early for our live stream. Today we have myself, Julio Valcarcel, and with me is my lovely co-host, Dustin Saunders.
Hello.
Brian is out of town this weekend, and so it is the Julio and Dustin show today. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about editors versus IDEs and advanced Linux. So before we jump into it, I have the link to the attendance I'm putting in the chat here. If you guys could go ahead and check that out, that lets us know that you are here. And then afterwards, we will be sending out the notes for these modules to you guys. In addition to that, Pat would, our recruiter and marketing manager, would love if you guys would give us a follow on YouTube or subscribe on YouTube and a follow on any of the other social media.
Instagram, LinkedIn.
Instagram. He's actually here today.
Twitter.
Pat, what media should they be following? Exerceo on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. LinkedIn's definitely the most important. We post the most on LinkedIn. So if you guys could check us out there, that'd be fantastic.
Yep.
So, getting us started today, we're gonna Dustin, what do we want to talk about first? Editors versus IDEs?
I think so. We can talk about the Holy Wars.
The Holy Wars.
Holy Wars, yes.
So, editors versus IDEs. Let me take a look.
So
Brian,
I think to kind of get everybody started here, editors versus IDEs. We like to talk about the tools of the trade. So something that we are very passionate about here is, being very efficient with the way that you do your work, making sure that you're able to do the job as you see fit with whatever tool you can use. So you'll hear that people get very, very religious when it comes to the tools that they use, and that everybody must subscribe to the same, policy and use the exact same tools all the time. But we kind of take a different approach. So when we're talking about IDEs, the first thing that you need to know is that it's an integrated development environment. That's what IDE stands for. It's just an acronym. And when we're talking about editors, it's, your normal text editors, whether that's Notepad, whether that's, talking about like Sublime Text or Atom, I think is another good example.
Yep.
Yeah, integrated.
VS Code's kind of erring more and more on the side of like, it's in this middle ground. So.
Yeah, base VS Code is probably an editor, but Atom's kind of similar in that aspect too, because you can just start adding so many plugins on it that it eventually becomes more like an IDE.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, everybody that's here this morning, feel free to jump in the chat. Let us know what you guys use. What editors, what IDEs do you guys use for your normal development? Yeah,
it's always interesting. Every session we run these, we always get to see what people are using, what the new thing is that we haven't heard about. I will say again, we're all about being efficient with the tools you use. And so we have our own set of tools that we use that we're efficient with our day to day. And it's sometimes not really necessary to go and step outside of your normal day to day of tool sets. Now, with that being said, I think there's some things we'll talk about here in a moment to push you guys a little bit outside of your comfort zone with your IDE or editor that you're using. So yeah, Dustin, do you want to talk a little bit about editors and why we have some preference to those initially, at least?
Yeah. So again, the first thing to note is that, whatever tool you're learning, make sure that you at least know the best way to, like I said, be efficient, know the keyboard shortcuts. At least the ones that, get you around and are most utilized when you're actually doing development or working through stuff. You got to be careful with custom shortcuts as well, because they don't necessarily travel as well into different environments. One of the things
that's definitely a good pre-COVID or post-COVID note there is if you're going and you're in the office and you're having a problem and you've gone and customized your IDE to all the extent it's perfect to every shortcut, you can do everything via the keyboard, and then you ask for your coworker to come over, or your teammate to come over, and hey, I need some help with this, and you're like, hey, here, can you try for me? And they go get on there, and then they start deleting files and doing all these other things because the shortcuts aren't the same. Yep. So we typically recommend that you keep the shortcuts the same for that reason, so that way it's universal. You can get other people to come help. Certainly some customization's not bad, but overriding the defaults we try to stay away from.
Yeah, I see Dominic in here using Emacs. Very nice, very nice. Like to see that.
Brian would be, I can hear Brian.
It's like, yeah,
Brian's the only Emacs user around here.
Yeah. So talking about editors specifically, Emacs is a great one to learn and know. VI is another one that's often, again, when we talk about holy wars, it's usually VI versus Emacs when it comes to editors.
Or Vim.
Or Vim. Yeah. If you're using
VI or Vim if
you're using the extended.
Interchangeable.
Yeah. We tend to push VI a little bit more than Emacs these days, just because that becomes the default Unix editor on most Unix systems. Emacs isn't always installed by default, so if you're looking for Emacs and it's not there, then it's good to have kind of a fallback into a VI editor at that point.
Yeah, and I think I need to make some more notes in here. I have transitioned to what Dustin would consider the dark side. I've done plenty of Windows development at this point, whereas Dustin's doing a lot of his work on Linux, and I've done plenty there as well. And depending on your environment you're working on, we really encourage you understanding and knowing how to use the tools that are available to you there, because you don't know when you log into primarily a server, if you're working on like a Linux server, when you log in, you're only going to have your shell.
First and foremost, no GUI.
Yeah, there's going to be no GUI. So you're going to be able to use the command line. So that's why we talk about command line a lot, and what we'll get into a little bit more in the advanced Linux module. But having familiarity with the core functionality. You don't have to use VI or Vim every day, but if you're working on Linux or your servers that you're deploying to are on Linux, knowing VI and how to open a file, save a file, quit out of the file.
Quit. That's the important one.
Save and quit, and also
quit without saving.
Quit without saving, yes.
Get out.
Yes, you've made a mistake and you want to back out of that.
Hey, I see Elijah's on this morning.
Yeah, he's Stone and Chisel. Yes, Elijah.
Oh, code reviews are hard that way.
I see Nano in the chat there too. That actually brings up a good point. I think someone's made mention of it, that in some future version of Linux in Ubuntu or CentOS, I'm not sure which one, they're changing the default editor to Nano.
Yeah.
So if that happens and that rolls out for a while, we'll probably suggest that you know both, because in our environment,
depending on which flavor.
Yep. In the enterprise, a lot of organizations are going to keep older versions because they're stable and that they're still getting security updates. So something like a CentOS 7 or a Red Hat 7 is very common on the enterprise side of things. And that's going to be VI for a while. You're going to be deploying to those servers. Once this starts to roll out, you might need to know Nano and VI. That way you can log in and Elijah's already Fedora. I think the latest version of Fedora changes it to Nano. So the next couple of versions of CentOS. We still have a little bit of time. Now, with that being said, talking about efficiency, this is a really key point that we didn't talk too much about in here previously, but we've expanded again in the world of Windows. I think this is important to talk about if you're doing like .NET development, is there's the difference between efficiency and knowing what's available to you. In that, in the Windows ecosystem, I've really encouraged our developers to all learn Visual Studio, proper Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code, if they're doing .NET development, because that's what the industry uses. So this is kind of, hey, learn what everybody else is learning to at least know how to get around with it. I personally use a different editor for my .NET development. I use something called Rider because I find it more efficient for my use cases for the work that I'm doing. But I still know how to get into Visual Studio. So the key point here too is in the .NET ecosystem, unfortunately, this is the sort of asterisk on it, and Dustin's going to cringe a little bit, is that you do unfortunately have to use an IDE for a lot of legacy development. Newer applications you can use just the command line. And that's where we start to recommend, like, hey, understanding the underlying build tools in Java or Ruby or Go or whatever the language is that you're building and you can build on a Linux ecosystem. get familiar with how the build system works underneath. Whether it be like a Maven or a Gradle. I don't know what the build tools for any of those other languages are. I don't do those, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, Python and Ruby, it's the read eval print loop. So it's just the Python command runs the Python code, for example. But if you're using like a server or something like Django for Python, it gets a little different. I think the big thing too is if you're using an IDE, it's good to start out using an IDE if you don't necessarily know what it's doing every single time, but learn those things. Those are the things that are important, because if you get into the habit of using your IDE for everything and you don't know what it's doing, that starts to become, your ball and chain that you have to drag around everywhere for yourself. Knowing exactly when you click that run button, what that is actually doing in your IDE is very helpful when you move into like a server environment. Where
or
you
DevOps or automation
just automating in general. That it really helps you understand exactly what that thing is doing, so then you can go and change and use those same practices or use those same commands that it's using in a different way. Whether that's automation with continuous integration, doing continuous deployments, or whether that's troubleshooting on a server somewhere and having to run some sort of debugging or some sort of build in a server environment.
Yeah, you definitely want to know the underlying process there, and that.
I've seen too many, I'll say, high-level engineers that are very stuck in their ways and just know that the green button in Eclipse for Java development is what runs the code, and it's like that's not the only way you can do it. That's really, running Maven or Gradle under the scenes and doing a whole other slew of things. If you know what you're doing, you can change that configuration very easily.
Yeah, that gets into a whole other chain of, I think we talk about this in build automation and build tools, and how that works, and using something that's universal across editors or IDEs. But I think the most important thing to take away here is know what the tools available to you on the system. On the Linux side of things, it's VI, possibly if you're using newer operating systems as server OSs, maybe Nano, but definitely VI. I don't see the VI going away in the next 10 years, probably, from at least the default, or where you have to log into the server and know how to use it in some capacity.
Well, again, with I thank Elijah for shouting out Fedora, because I think that's the one that's switching, but that is the super bleeding edge Red Hat version of Linux, and so that means to me that CentOS being the stable other side of that,
5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's going to be a long time before CentOS actually gets those upgrades to where Nano is the default. So that still means you have to know VI before Nano takes over in that regard for that specific example. So just because Fedora is doing it, they're experimenting with it there. It still has to go through their entire life cycle of moving it into Red Hat and then moving it into CentOS and then getting that working.
On the Windows side of things, I think it's pretty easy to use Notepad. I think everybody can attest to that. They can open a file with Notepad. So it's a little bit different when you do have the GUI there, and most Windows environments have some sort of user interface for better or for worse. So a little bit different there. So know the underlying editor and make sure you're comfortable with that. We actually... Elijah or Max, if you guys could post into the chat for me the link to Over the Wire, talking about getting familiar with the command line and the tools that are available to you there. We always recommend that everybody runs through the first 10 levels of Bandit on Over the Wire. And the whole purpose of that is to get familiar with the command line, get familiar with the tools you have available to you. Using VI to open up files and close them, or using other tools. I'm not going to give away too many of the answers there, but
let's see. I think I found it quickly, so I can do that as well. There we go. So one last note I'll say for editors versus IDEs. And again, if you guys have questions out there, feel free to post them. We'll answer them as quickly as they come in. But one other thing is, how often when you're developing, are you switching between your keyboard and your mouse? It's a very small and subtle thing, but it's something that the more time that you can have your hands, both of your hands on your keyboard typing, the faster and more efficient you will be as well. So just something as simple as improving your keyboarding skills and understanding the shortcuts.
Well, I hope that everyone in the stream today knows the what Control C or Command C if you're on Mac and Control V do. And
Yes.
if you don't, please learn those.
You mean I can't just right click on my mouse and copy and then right click and paste? And
I don't know what happened with your chat there, Dustin. I see it on
did it not go? I don't know. Hopefully.
Yeah. Let us know if you guys don't see the chat to over the wire. It seems like YouTube chat is messing up again.
I can post it a second time as well. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, so yeah, keyboarding in general is just a lot easier. And the more that you can keep your hands on the keyboard using shortcuts to do normal operations that you would with your mouse. For example, one of the things that I took on learning outside of work in VI specifically was learning how to copy large swaths of code and paste it using the visual mode, so that I don't have to go over to my mouse, drag and click to select a large couple lines of text and then copy them.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Shortcuts, learn the basic ones. Control X, Matthew mentioned there. Yes, that's you got to look that one up as well.
Yep.
And so I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Kofi. What's IDEs again? So IDE is just integrated development environment. Mm-hmm. So the big difference between that and an editor is all the surrounding tooling to go and automate and make things faster for your development process. So, don't get us wrong in that. You definitely, knowing an IDE can make your efficiency go really high, but you don't need an IDE to be efficient.
Yes.
You can do all the same things on the command line if you get comfortable with it.
There's pros and cons to both.
Yep. Yeah. So
editors are generally open a file, save a file.
Yep.
Very, very
maybe
basic
a file
commands.
Browser. Something like an Atom or Sublime or
search and replace.
Yep.
Your IDE is going to be integrated into your build environment, your, I'll say, test framework, potentially into your source control management solution. If you're using Git, for example, I haven't
found an IDE that I've liked there. Anything except for the command line. That the command line Git is.
If you are using SVN still, I've known that the plugins and tools for SVN has been pretty good over the years in terms of IDEs. But yeah, Git seems to be the easiest at command line these days. So there hasn't been a one single good set of tools for Git in IDE that I found either. It becomes very hard. Yeah. And again, if you guys know them, feel free to shout them out because we'd love to explore.
Yep.
We're always looking to improve our process too.
So Dustin, moving to the next section here, advanced Linux. So we've sort of started talking a little bit about this in the command line.
Yes.
And why it's important to be familiar with it. You want to talk a little bit about, I'll let you get this started. I know some of these you're pretty familiar with and others I've stolen away from you having to do.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot that Julio likes to steal so that I don't, get myself in trouble here.
Yes. Dustin is not a system admin.
Yeah, take away the admin. I don't want it. That's too much responsibility for me. So the first thing that we really want to, strive to get across here is when we're talking advanced Linux, the most basic advanced topic, and I know that sounds really weird, is permissions. Everybody and their mother need to know about permissions when it comes to Linux. It becomes the single most issue that people run into when it comes to...
when you're getting started. If you're doing any sort of development, or if you're dealing with... one of the things we used to deal with a lot is like PHP development, where you need to go and put things into a folder outside of your home directory, or edit a config file. Permissions start to come into play, and there's a lot of things online that will tell you to go and change the permissions and change them in a way that might leave your system pretty insecure. So,
well, the other thing too is once a developer understands and knows how to use sudo, it's a great tool. But you can get yourself in a lot of trouble if you use it incorrectly in a certain way. So sudo being another topic that we'll discuss later, and that's where you can elevate your own privilege to do things. But if you do that, then the permissions of whatever you're acting upon actually transitions into root, for example, if you're using sudo and just using the root user. So you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. We found that there's been multiple developers that have accidentally use sudo with git, for example, for their source control management. And then when they clone, their entire repo comes down and it's all owned by root and they can't do anything in it. So it becomes a big issue. The big thing to remember with permissions is that, there's 3 different modes that you have to worry about, whether you're
for each. Switch to your screen?
Yeah, go for it. I'm actually operating here in Linux today. So you can see I've got a couple files here. The big thing to note is when I run ls, the list command with -l, it gives me all of the goodies that I need to know when it comes to the file permissions. So if you look, that's all of these letters here. So each of these actually represent the permissions of a given file or folder within the file system. So that first D in there is just telling me it's a directory. And then each octet or 3 letters is actually a different group of permissions. So you've got the read, the write, and the execute permissions for a file. And you see that they are repeated 3 different times. So that first octet, or that first set of 3 characters, is actually for the owner of the file, which you can see is owned by me right now.
To use the proper syntax for Unix, it would be the user.
The user, yes.
That's you, and then
right.
The second set is for
the group. Yes.
And then the last one is other.
Everybody else.
Well, other. So O.
Yes.
So that's where you want to make sure that I've for the longest time got that always messed up.
Yep.
Like, which character do I need to use to set the group permissions, or the user, or
it's
other?
User, group, other.
Yep.
UGO. There's no good acronym for that, or good mnemonic to remember that, but
and
first, second, last. It just kind of becomes ubiquitous, and you kind of learn it as you go. But when I talk about octets here, the one thing that you need to remember with permissions too is that these are just binary characters. So an octet is just a set of 3 binary.
It's 8 bits.
It's 8 bits basically. So if you flip, the one in the middle, if you flip the one at the front, that's going to change the permissions. And you can represent those in numbers 0 through 7 as well. So for example, if you give 7 permission to a user.
Speaking of editors, you want to pull up VI and show a couple of examples there? And
I can, yeah. So I actually have a couple files in here too. So lesson A, blank file. Once I hit the I can get into insert mode. Ooh. So if we're talking about permissions.
Subnetting is fantastic. We don't actually have a module on that, but I won't bore everyone to sleep with subnetting today.
Yeah, so if we're talking, what the permissions were in that directory, for example, you've got, 3 different, an octet of 3 different characters. So, if we wanted to represent what that RWX is, each of the bits would be 1, which then in binary, this would equate to 7. So when we're talking about permissions on a file or a folder, usually you'll either hear that, just set it to 777 and you'll have access to everything. Whereas if you are, if you want to lock something down, for example, you see that that other group has got 101 as the write is actually turned off, but the execute is there. That's equal to 5 in binary because the 4 place and the 1 place are turned on. So that would actually look more of, a 5 in that case. So what we typically do for our directories for the users, we give them 7 because they have access to everything. And then depending on how we want to lock down the different directories and things, you can set it to 5. And that allows the user to read into the directories as well as execute within the directories. So for example, if you are trying to, migrate or, move into them with a CD command, you can actually do that once you have the execute privilege. So I'm actually going to save and quit this file with WQ. And if we go and actually look at this file now, we'll see that it's different than a directory. And again, it's owned by me, it's owned by my group as well, but the permissions are a little different. So it's not a directory, so you've got a dash at the front, and it's just write and read. So that actually, if we go back into that file, we can talk about that a little bit too. So we've got, this is what the permissions look like on the file. So for example, we've got that set up on the read and write, the execute is off. So you've got 1, 1, 0. That equates to 6, obviously, because you've got a 4, a 2, and then a 0 within that binary string. So for files, what we end up doing is giving 6 or 7, depending on if it's an executable file, which we'll go over in a minute, for general permissions. And what we end up doing is either giving that as a 664, being that last one being a 4. As you can see, it's just 1, 0, 0, since the read is turned on, but the write and the execute are turned off. So general file permissions end up being either 664 or even 644 if you want to lock it down to that group only having read permissions. I'll take a quick second here. We doing all right?
Yeah, the audio is coming through weird on YouTube.
Oh, fun.
It's jumping.
Uh-oh. So it's not just the chat today, it's also the audio that's having problems.
Yeah.
So when it comes to permissions, again, the main thing that we want to keep in mind is that systems have default permissions set up as well. So you'll see that when you go and create a new file, which we can do very easily with a touch command, we'll just call it new file here. So if I touch a new file and then we go and list it again, that new file is going to have a default set of permissions on it. And in this case, this is a read write, and a read. So that would be your 664 again, in terms of the user, the group, and the other permissions. And what that means is that any default file that we create on our system right now is going to have that same set of permissions. And that's actually set by a command called Umask, which is another command that you can go and use and run. So this actually will set, as part of the default permissions that a file or folder gets when you actually create a file or folder on the system. System administrators can actually set the Umask for given users to help lock down those permissions across the entire system. So if you've got a server that a bunch of developers or a bunch of other users are, interacting with on a daily basis, you can set the Umask such that they can only see their files and that the other is turned off, for example, so that nobody else can read each other's files. And you can really lock down and kind of customize the way that default file permissions are set up. But when it comes down to it, as a developer, the big thing is just remembering what the read, write, execute looks like and understanding what you're actually doing with those. So if we look at, I think it's in my session 3 here, I've got a hello world script set up. So we're going to cd into that directory, and then we can look at the permissions within here. So I've actually set, this is a file type. You can see that as it doesn't have the directory. But in addition, you'll see that I actually have the permission set to 775 on this file. I've actually added the execute to this file. And what that allows me to do is...
Dustin, pause 1 second.
Yep.
I'm just going to see if transitioning the scene back. We'll see when it catches up. Go ahead and continue.
Yeah, no worries. I see Kofi left a message in there. 421 is correct. Yeah, it's just a binary string at that point for that, adding all the way up to 8. Or in this case, 7, because it's 0 through 7. So when we're talking about execute, all that allows me to do is actually execute that file quickly at command line, and that gives me access to run this command. So using the cat command, we can actually see what's in there. I just set up a small bash script that's going to echo hello world for today's session. But what that allows me to do is if we were to use the change mod command, which allows you to change the permissions on a file, we can actually set that to, we'll set it back to 664 on the hello world script. And then if we do an ls on it again, we can see that it's no longer green, which is just the terminal's way of indicating that it's an executable file. But we can also see that the execute has been removed from it as that last bit has been turned off. So if we change mod back to 775, we'll see that has then as well. We turned the execute back on for that. Another way that you can use change mod is by using what's a plus or a minus on the actual command or the actual set of permissions that you want to add. So what I typically do when I'm adding execute to a file, if I know we're going to change this back real quick to not have execute, but what I'll do is I'll use just a plus X as part of the command. And then what that'll do is that'll change that back to have execute permissions again. And you can do that going the opposite way of removing X by doing a minus X. And we can see that. Oh, mistyped there for a minute. And you can see that the execute is no longer there. So yeah, I think that in terms of permissions, I think that's kind of there. The other set of commands you've got is change own, which change the ownership of the file. So I don't have any other users set up right now to change the ownership, but you can very easily say, I want to change the permissions of the file and who owns the file to the user and the group, for example.
So real quick, Dustin, I'm going to go ahead and just for everyone real quick, I'm going to let catch up here, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream and restart it and just see if that fixes this choppy audio, because it is pretty horrific.
Oh, no.
Everything sounds fine on my end, so I'm going to wait till...
Go for it. Yeah, we'll sit tight. We'll stand by.
Yeah. All right, so coffee break.
Yes.
All right.
Speaking of coffee.
I stopped and restarted on our end, so let me just see if it...
No subnetting, please.
No, it didn't fix it. All right, I'm going to try fully stopping the stream and restart again. No.
YouTube output.
Yes. All right. Thank you, YouTube. It says my stream is healthy.
But is it, though?
All right. Let's try talking a little bit.
Sorry. Sip of coffee. Oh, very good. Do we got any coffee lovers in the chat? I was going to say, every morning I wake up, have a couple cups. Wakes me up in the morning. How we looking? Well, it's more how are we sounding, I guess.
Not sounding great.
Yes. Coffee. Hey. There we go. Alan just finished his cup.
All right, let's see.
There you go. Getting some good chat. I prefer to drink mine black for anybody out there. It sounds like we've got some that like their milk foam as well.
I can't ever foam.
So my wife recently bought a espresso machine, and the first time she tried to use the steamer arm, she over foamed the milk, and it just went everywhere all over the countertop. It was very fun. Thankfully that she didn't burn herself or anything, and she was able to just turn the machine off. But she was like, I am going to not do this again for a little bit of time until I. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like just a Mr. Coffee or something like that. So it's very simple, but. Yeah. Uh-oh.
All right, I think maybe no, still choppy.
Still choppy. Yeah. All right. Well.
All right, guys. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream in YouTube Live, and then just go live again. So it might send you to a new URL. So we will give this a go and see how that goes.
Choppy Walters.